anomalous weather patterns coming into the extended period. We're going to cover that a little bit later, but here's a little taste of maybe some of that anomaly. Look at that Atlantic, hardly anything going on. Here's the extended outlook from the National Hurricane Center. One little area southeast of Bermuda, 0% chance of formation in the next 7 days. And this other area, 500 miles southwest of Cape Verde, this has a 20% chance of development. I'm going to go ahead and give you a closer look at that. These are some graphics produced in-house. This shows the southern North Atlantic, and you can see right here, that's the Cape Verde Islands. Here's the Leeward Islands. There's Puerto Rico, Dominica, Haiti, I should say Dominican Republic, and Cuba and Florida right there. So the area we're going to be watching is right in here. Very weak region of troughing. And as we go forward into Thursday and Friday, this comes together, illustrated by the integrated vapor transport. That's kind of a combination of both moisture and wind flow. So when both of those pick up, we really start seeing it. And that is an easterly wave propagating westward and reaching the Leeward Islands probably Monday or Tuesday. But you can see we barely have a closed contour, so that's very likely going to remain a tropical disturbance or tropical depression, something like that. And that's going to continue on into the Caribbean. Just this very strong trade wind flow with very little in the way of any significant waves, but this one will have to be watched midweek next week because that could start developing. There we've got a closed contour, and that's going to be right about here. But that's September 7th, so that is a long ways off. And this other area here, that's around Haiti for, September 7th. That could have an effect in the southeastern U.S., but that is a long ways down the road. A little bit of trivia. What's the next storm name going to be? Francine. And the next one, Gordon. What might Gordon look like? Well, Hurricane Gordon very likely to be very demanding and quality-oriented. Anyway, let's head into the current weather. Well, checking out that surface chart in the southern U.S., very characteristic of late August, but lots of tropical moisture feeding into the coastal areas, into parts of Arkansas, Louisiana, and as you go further west, we get that active monsoon pattern focused on the Continental Divide and the White Mountains and Mogollon Rim. But some big changes up to the north, a strong frontal system moving into Rapid City, into Wyoming, and into Utah. Let's take a closer look at that. There it is up there in Montana, a very compact, well-defined system along the Alberta-Montana border, dry slot moving into central Montana. Most of the stronger dynamics located in Saskatchewan and near the border areas. It is somewhat of a dry front as you go south. But if you look at that cloud field, some definite indications of strong mid and upper level flow, gravity waves across the Grand Tetons into Yellowstone and over to Gillette and Sheridan. And this looks like some standing lenticular cloud forms up there. I don't think, I'm not sure what's out there. That's a very sparsely populated region north of the Black Hills. I do know the Devil's Tower is out in that area. Anyway, let's look at the radar because there is some interesting stuff going on right there around Rapid City. A strong frontal boundary showing up on the reflectivity. This is the Rapid City radar. You can see that moving across Wall and towards Phillip, where they were expecting almost 100 degrees earlier this afternoon. And to see what's happening, we want to grab ourselves some surface charts. You can see that even though we have radar data being depicted, it has filtered out that boundary. So you have to be careful using those radar mosaics. It's always good to look at the actual base reflectivity data. You can see there's so much more to be found on those products. But here the focus is on surface data. We can see that strong northwesterly flow, 34-knot gusts at Rapid City, and out ahead of it, some very hot temperatures, 100 at Phillip, South Dakota, 98 at Pine Ridge, and mid to upper 90s all the way into western Nebraska. The Storm Prediction Center does have an enhanced risk of severe thunderstorms in the Dakotas, mostly south of Bismarck. All hazards are possible there, including a few tornadoes. Wind and hail will likely be the major factors for today. Let's zoom in on that. It is still very early in the convective day, but we're starting to see the appearance of some vertical cumulus elements, maybe all the way up there into southwestern North Dakota. All of this right here, this is transverse banding. That's going to be stratocumulus and stratus. That is basically indicating the shear that's available to these storms as they get going, and we should see those develop in the next few hours. And here's the general trend from the high-resolution rapid refresh going into the remainder of this afternoon. Storms breaking out all across central North Dakota. There could be some isolated supercells within that. And this complex will track eastward during the evening into the Grand Forks and Fargo area. Other cells developing on the backside. This will be more dynamically produced, maybe a little bit more elevated, and the main risk with those will be strong winds and maybe a little bit of small hail. In the northeastern region, we also have a slight risk across southern Pennsylvania into Ohio. You can see the existing storms have pushed to the southern periphery of that slight risk area. We're not really expecting much more to develop. Some of these cells in northern Pennsylvania may get going and track into the central part of the state, but that will probably be most of what we have, except for this activity down around Cincinnati, and I guess it'll be north of Evansville. Heat has been the main factor for today. Temperatures up to 94, 95 degrees around Philadelphia. With those 70-degree dew points, heat indexes will be up near 105. So there is an excessive heat warning in effect for the entire Philadelphia area. Around that, a large heat advisory extending from eastern Virginia into much of Maryland, up through southeastern Pennsylvania, and into the New York City area. So that is one area where you're going to have to be careful if you're out and about. In the southeastern U.S., fair skies across much of Georgia and the Carolinas. Some prolific thunderstorm activity going on in Florida this afternoon. That is very common for August. Other cells along the sea breeze up into the Pensacola area, and we pick up even more activity near that disturbance out there in Louisiana and Texas. We'll cover that shortly. But Nashville, the Weather Service there was forecasting 106 for a high this afternoon. That would tie the all-time record for August. So far, looks like we're only seeing about 100, so we may not see that 106, but it is going to be another hot one for tomorrow, 102, and continue near 100 degrees for much of the remainder of the week. Texas and the Arklatex area, the Ozarks, continue to be affected by this disturbance wandering across the state. Not quite showing up as well as it did a couple of days ago, but there is some cyclonic flow right there around Beaumont, Port Arthur, and Lake Charles. And with those cyclonic circulations, we usually have a cold pocket, which helps produce unstable conditions. Another little low around Abilene, but much of the southeastern U.S. dominated by this large ridge. That's going to be a subtropical high centered across Nashville, and the anticyclonic flow going around that large-scale system. So those features we have in Texas, they're embedded in that larger-scale anticyclone. But you can see up north a major occlusion embedded there in the prevailing westerlies, centered across southwestern Saskatchewan. We can see those disturbances a little bit better on the 500 millibar heights and vorticity. This and the previous chart, those were for about 18,000 feet, 3 kilometers above the ground. So those are mid-tropospheric charts. So this does show things a little bit better. See that area of red right there around Beaumont? That's the upper level low. This other low pressure area right there in the mid-levels around Abilene, maybe extending up towards Wichita Falls. And this other one we're going to talk about right here, a little bit stronger, that's centered around Silver City, New Mexico. That's going to be 1 p.m. And then this afternoon drifts up maybe just southwest of Albuquerque. and yet another one located around Las Vegas. So how does that stack up on the satellite picture? Well, where we have that monsoon moisture, we do get convection. Remember that upper level low located right here, tracking up towards southwest of Albuquerque. So that is going to be a wet weather pattern for much of the I-40 corridor between Winslow and Albuquerque, maybe Klein's Corner, and maybe down along the Sacramento Mountains. But not as much moisture as you go further west, so we're not really getting much out of that Las Vegas upper level low. And you're probably asking about the moisture. Show me the moisture. Where is it? We can see it here on the dew point plots. And you're going to look in the lower left corner of each plot. We've got 50s to 60s. And in the mountainous terrain during the middle of summer, that's all you really need to get thunderstorms going during the afternoon. As you go further to the west, though, that drops off into the 40s and 30s, which is not supportive for convection. And as you go further north, 20s around Tonopah. Of course, that's where I used to work, Tonopah Test Range. My first assignment was with that F-117 program, and from there I went to the 6-month forecasting course, and then, of course, to Dyess Air Force Base. And then as you go further north, it does get much drier, down to a 9-degree dew point there around Owyhee, and 26 at Boise. And I did realize I need to insert a caveat when I said that these 20s and 30s were not supportive of convection. I'm talking about deep, moist convection. There's definitely convection there with 100-degree temperatures. You're going to get thermals, clear updrafts that produce turbulence, but you're not really going to get much in the way of convective clouds, maybe some cumulus, maybe some showers on the mountains, but really nothing in the valleys. Earlier today, south of Las Vegas, some storms did try to get going on these mountains right there, but they pretty much fell apart, and we're just left with this little cumulus field because the air mass is too dry to support deep, moist convection. And as we head into the northwest region, well, we've already seen some of this. There are high wind warnings today in the foothills northwest of Great Falls, west winds gusting to 70 miles an hour. And we do have some of our first winter weather advisories in western Montana above 5,000 feet, mostly around the region east of Missoula and Kalispell, looking for 3 to 6 inches there. Frost and freeze advisories for tonight for Butte and Missoula, temperatures down to 28 to 33 Fahrenheit. So that cold air is a combination of advection from the cooler areas of the Pacific and Western Canada, and also wet bulbing as we get these moist layers precipitating into dry air. That reduces the temperature as well. And then further south, a large area of red flag advisories in southern Wyoming, gusty southwest winds, and of course that front moving through the area. Already got some wildfires breaking out there in the Salmon River Mountains. Now, are we going to get any of that cold air further south? Let's take a look at the ECMWF, the Extreme Forecast Index, and you can see the blue colors indicating below normal conditions. And as we go into the weekend, that kind of breaks up, and the area of stronger winds indicated by the purple lifts up into Winnipeg, Western Ontario, and pretty much bypasses the Midwest. In fact, that heat remains entrenched in Ohio and Kentucky. So this is Saturday. We go into Sunday and Monday. Looks rather quiet across the U.S., but we are going to have this high-pressure area sink into the Great Lakes area, some cooler conditions around Detroit, and maybe even a sliver of that across Kansas into Oklahoma and West Texas. So that is the lowdown on what's happening across the nation. Going into the Pacific, starting to see that North Pacific high re-enter the picture. 1032 millibars there west of Washington. Some of that extending into Washington and Portland itself, creating some very pleasant conditions. But up to the north, there's the Pacific Storm Track coming right into southeastern Alaska. They do have small craft advisories through the interior straits around Juneau and Ketchikan. And Ketchikan, of course, was dealing with that flooding. If you take a look at the internet, look at some of those landslide pictures, very dramatic, cutting right into the town. In Canada, some weather statements in Alberta on the backside of this weather system. Looking for heavy rains in southern Alberta, Calgary, Lethbridge, and Red Deer. Advisories have been issued in southwestern Saskatchewan out towards Medicine Hat for funnel clouds. They're looking for the possibility of some landspout activity. That's partly due to that strong cold core low aloft with these 50s temperatures, these elevated moisture readings, dew points around 50. That all provides a somewhat unstable profile. So any place you get surface heating going on, that can be a potent area for landspout formation. Out there in the central part of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, warm advection. And then we get into this other somewhat anomalous pattern. This is more of an October type setup. Very strong anticyclone, 1026 millibars sinking into Ontario and Quebec, bringing unseasonably cold temperatures all the way to the St. Lawrence River Valley. Let's take a look at the upper air chart, and you're already familiar with some of this, most notably that strong upper level low. Then as we go into the weekend, we see anticyclogenesis in the mid-levels across Nevada and Utah. And this high-pressure area loft starts breaking down across the southeastern U.S. The general effect, a little bit of enhancement in the northerly flow through the central U.S., very strong westerlies across Canada, some troughing coming into Ontario for the weekend. And then going into next week, the prevailing pattern is just going to be ridging across the Midwest, so continued warm temperatures in that part of the country. Indeterminate across the southern states, the southwestern U.S., and the very last frame we have for late next week, big old high across the Great Basin area, low pressure area across the eastern U.S., and continued northerly flow. And that's going to mean a reduction in the heat in the central U.S. and into Texas, and we could always use that here in Texas. Our power bills here on some months are near $500 and could definitely use less of that. So let's take a look at that forecast going into tonight. The frontal system moves towards the Fargo and Sioux Falls area for tomorrow morning, and then into Minnesota for the afternoon. We do have a slight risk of severe thunderstorms from Minneapolis down to Des Moines over to Sioux City. So that's going to be our main area of concern near that warm front and in the nose of the low-level jet. Hail, downdraft winds, those are going to be the main concern, but isolated tornadoes are possible. There will be extensive rains all up and down this frontal boundary from Minneapolis down to Goodland. Out east along this other frontal boundary, a large marginal risk of severe thunderstorms in Virginia down to the Carolinas. And another day of heat, as we mentioned, in Nashville, very active on the Texas Gulf Coast, Louisiana, into East Texas, more thunderstorms, and in the southwestern U.S., a decline in monsoon activity for Thursday. Just temporary. The rain will be mostly in the White Mountains and in the higher terrain of New Mexico. Okay, so we go on into Friday. Nocturnal thunderstorms all through the western Midwest region, the Corn Belt into Kansas. Then we reset the picture for Friday. There's early Friday afternoon. You can see this frontal system progressing into the western Great Lakes. The Storm Prediction Center does have a marginal risk of severe thunderstorms from Cleveland, Detroit, Indianapolis, Chicago, all through this area right there. That's going to be the eastern Corn Belt. Clusters of strong storms will develop in that intense August heat. Hail and wind will be the primary concerns. And this is going to be the evening chart. There's all those clusters all up and down the boundary, and some of that extending into the Ozarks as well. Monsoon rains increase in New Mexico, West Texas, and the Mogollon Rim once again, and we've got this new frontal boundary increasing easterly flow, which tends to be wet in New Mexico. So a lot of factors coming together for heavier rains for Friday and Saturday there. Then we go into Saturday. This frontal boundary continues to push south. Anytime we have a boundary in Texas this time of year, that's going to be a wet pattern. Extensive rainfall through the Appalachians all the way into Kentucky and Tennessee. Nashville finally getting a break, looking for a high of 93 there. Most of the cities in this region running about 94 to 97. If you're in the higher elevations of Arizona, this is going to be the best day for rain. Numerous storms along the White Mountains and the Mogollon Rim. Then we go into Sunday. Another rainy day in Texas. Rains along that frontal boundary in the Carolinas, Virginia, into the Atlanta area. So there could be some problems if you're flying into Atlanta for Sunday. So you want to pay attention to the weather this weekend if you're changing flights at that airport. Then we go into Monday. The monsoon pattern starts shutting down in Arizona. Numerous storms in West Texas, however. This frontal boundary producing numerous showers and storms through the Gulf Coast area from Monday into Tuesday. And I don't know if you've watched some of these changes going on the chart. This is very anomalous for summer. Very strong high-pressure areas. What looks like a strong polar outbreak into Minnesota. Look at the Gulf Coast there. Strong northeasterly flow. Cloudy conditions and lots of rain. The lack of hurricane activity in the Gulf, the southwestern Atlantic, the cold anomaly in the Central Plains, and a very pronounced lack of thermal troughing in West Texas. Usually that's something we see all the time during the warm season, from Tucumcari, Clayton, all the way up to La Junta and Lamar. And of course, all this rain out here in West Texas, that's very anomalous for this time of year. And they certainly need that because they are in a severe drought. Places like Marfa, all across the Davis Mountains, they could certainly use that rain. So this is somewhat of a major pattern shift. It's probably not going to persist because it's still early September, but it is reminiscent of a fall pattern, and it's a sign that we need to start paying attention to our transition season forecasting techniques. And that's all for this edition of Forecast Lab. Hopefully you found that informative and interesting. If there's anything you want to see, any charts or special perspectives, let me know, and we'll see if we can work that in. Anyway, hope you have a great Wednesday night and Thursday. We'll see you back here for another edition on Friday. Take care. Bye-bye.